Well, here we are at the Roman baths, and for thousands of years, humans have marveled at the hot water that bubbles out of the earth right under these spots. In ancient Roman times, high society enjoyed soaking in the mineral springs, and they built a large bathhouse around it from Londinium. That's the name of the place when it was Latin times, London. Romans traveled so often to Aquasulis that the city was called to take a bath. It finally just became known simply as Bath. Today, a fine museum surrounds the ancient bathhouse. Uh, we are looking at it here. We're not using the audio guide, but it has an excellent audio guide as well that helps us go through the temple. Out here on this terrace, it's lined with statues of VIRs, or as Rick Steves would call them, very important Romans. The terrace evokes ancient times, but it was actually built around the 1890s. Terrace sits atop remarkably well-preserved lower story, which was actually built by the Romans. The bases of the columns, the pavements, and the lead-lined pools are all original from the 1st century AD. Those ancient ruins had sat undisturbed for centuries before being excavated in about the 1870s, and then they turned it into this museum. And the terrace statues help put a face on the bath's history. Julius Caesar first set foot in Britain in 55 BC. Claudius conquered the Celts in Bath in AD 443 and enclosed the first bathing pool with oak pilings. Hadrian, around 120 after Christ, enlarged the complex around it, and Constantine in 325 ruled when baths were at their peak of their grandeur. It's a fantastic view. Down here, if you look very carefully, we're looking down into another spring where little air bubbles remind us that about every day, 240,000 gallons of water emerge from the earth, like magic. It must have at least seemed that way to the Romans. At a constant 115 degrees, it comes from rainwater, falls on the nearby hills, filters down through these layers of limestone that are about 2 miles deep around here, where it's heated by the Earth's core and then rises back up through the cracks of the surface. So the water you see down there first fell as rain about 10,000 years ago, making the Romans seem relatively recent. Oh, the first model here, plexiglass, shows the humble baths when they were around 70 AD. There were just two buildings at that time, with the spring was in between them. But it makes clear the complexes had a dual purpose. The bathhouse was for soaking and the healing, and the temple was for worshiping. The goddess Sulis Minerva was who was worshipped here, and who gave mankind such a wonderful thermal spring. Now this model here shows the baths at their peak at around 325. The tallest building with the barrel arch roof is the great bath you see today with its big swimming pool. The smaller arch rooms alongside were the other bathhouses. There were the other buildings like dressing rooms and saunas and cold plunges and so on. The red tiled sections we see over here was the temple. Mm-hmm. Imagine being a Roman arriving here to worship at the temple. which would have stood at the far end of this room. You'd pause to sacrifice an animal at the top of the greatest altar on your right. Notice the finely carved statues of Hercules. As we continue onward, we come to the actual end where we come to a gilded bronze statue of the goddess Sulis Minerva. Now around the corner here, the surviving head is on display. The statue once wore a helmet. Tiny holes up in the rivulets. And here's the baths down at a lower level. You can imagine the Romans frolicking around here. It's a 5-foot deep pool. These days it's turned a delicious looking green. It used to originally not be that color. Now it's full of algae from people being too close to it, so we're not supposed to touch it. It originally housed a spacious hall with a 3-story tall arched ceiling, and sunlight filtered in through the vast windows above. Now, this is not unusual for Rome. Rome had bathhouses almost everywhere. If you had a city, you basically had a bath. Now, besides a way of keeping clean, they also served as kind of a fitness club, and they were kind of a social center. Now, this bath had an added feature of a natural thermal springs whose sulfurous content purposefully leached out into impurities, cured arthritis, and restored vigor. So that was a natural thing. It does smell a little bit in here, but not too bad, not too horrible. These are so a series of rooms that show basically how the Romans lived. It was actually in the area itself. Okay, how they wrote, typical Romans bathed. You undress in the first room. Here we are. So we would undress in this room. We would warm up in the next room. We get a massage in another room, and then we'd start the cool down process in the other room. So it was quite a process to get all prettified and all cleaned up. Okay. Back out here, did you know that the Brits actually swam in this pool up into the 1970s? 1970s. And then they opened a thermospa a few blocks away that are heated by the same thing. As you get near the end of the tour here, this is this remarkable pool that shows all the coins that were tossed into it over the years. An enormous store of value, I'm sure. Marvel at the uneven the floor and how you've got a spot here where some of the overflow still flows from the hot spring that we saw into the spring itself. This here is the remains of the brick arch that used to go over the top of the entire place when it was not open air. It was not always open there. Here you can see better of the pool we saw through the window earlier. And if you look carefully, you can see the bubbles coming up through it. It's still an active spring even to this time.